In the heart of Springfield, where the ordinary often tangled with the bizarre, stood the chaotic laboratory of Professor John Frink. The building was a monstrosity of mismatched design, smokestacks, satellite dishes, and flickering neon signs, jutted out at odd angles, as if the structure itself defied reason. Inside, the lab was a shrine to Frink's brilliance and lunacy. Shelves sagged under the weight of beakers filled with glowing liquids, while half-finished robots twitched on. Workbenches like dying insects, a perpetual motion machine spun silently in one corner, mocking physics, and nearby, a cloning device sat idle, its last experiment, a two-headed guinea pig gnawing at its cage. The air buzzed with electricity and the faint stench of scorched metal. On this doomed day, Frink was lost in his most daring invention yet, the dimensional energy extractor. This hulking contraption, a mess of wires, crystals, and vacuum tubes, was meant to breach the barriers between dimensions and draw power from unseen worlds. Frink dreamed it would end Springfield's energy woes and cement his legacy. But he was blind to the truth. The realms he probed were not sterile voids, but festering pits of ancient, unspeakable horrors, home to entities like the Devourer of Worlds. Frink adjusted the machine's dials, muttering formulas under his breath. When the lab door flew open with a bang, Homer Simpson stumbled in, his eyes bleary from too many Duff beers, a half-eaten donut dangling from his sticky fingers. "Hey, Professor Brainiac!" Homer slurred, his voice bouncing off the cluttered walls. "I need your help with something real important." Frink sighed, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Homer, I'm in the middle of a critical experiment. Can't this wait?" Homer shook his head wildly. "No way! Marge is gonna skin me if I don't fix the toaster. It keeps burning the toast, and you know how she gets about breakfast." Frink rubbed his temples. "A toaster? You're asking me to fix a toaster when I'm about to revolutionize science?" Homer grinned, unfazed. "Yeah, exactly. So, can you do it?" "Fine," Frink muttered. "Bring it tomorrow. But right now, I need to concentrate." Unheeding, Homer ambled toward the dimensional energy extractor. "Whoa, this looks neat. What's it do?" Frink's voice spiked with panic. "Don't touch that! It's highly unstable!" Too late. Homer tripped over a stray cable, flailing as he grabbed the machine for balance. His hand smashed down on a red button labeled "Do Not Press," and the device roared to life. "Oh no," Frink breathed. A blinding light flooded the room as the machine's hum grew into a deafening wail. In the center of the lab, a pinpoint of light swelled into a swirling vortex, a jagged tear in reality itself. From its depths oozed a darkness blacker than midnight, laced with whispers in a tongue no human should understand. Homer staggered back, pale. Did I do that?" Frink stood rooted, staring at the portal with dread and awe. "You've opened a rift to another dimension, but this isn't what I planned." As the vortex steadied, Frink leaned closer, peering into its abyss. For a fleeting second he glimpsed something, a pair of eyes, vast and timeless, burning with a hunger older than the stars. They locked onto him, and his heart stuttered. Then they vanished, leaving only writhing shadows that slithered into the room like living smoke. Frink stumbled back, his face drained of color. "What have I done?" he whispered. Homer scratched his head, still clutching his donut. "So, is this gonna fix my toaster or what?" Frink glared at him, incredulous. "Homer, we have much bigger problems now." Outside, Springfield's sky twisted into a sickly crimson. Clouds coiled into grotesque shapes, and a frigid wind howled through the streets. Townsfolk paused, gazing upward with unease. At the nuclear power plant, Mr. Burns squinted out his window. "Smithers, what's that racket out there?" "I'm not sure, sir," Smithers replied, "but it's unsettling." At the Simpson home, Lisa sat in her room, engrossed in a quantum physics book, when a sudden chill prickled her skin. She glanced out her window and froze. The sky was darkening, heavy with an oppressive weight she couldn't name. "Mom!" she shouted, racing downstairs. "Something's wrong outside." Marge was in the kitchen, soothing a fussy Maggie. "What is it, Lisa? Look at the sky, it's not normal." Marge peeked out and gasped. "Goodness, it's odd. Maybe a storm?" Bart wandered in from the living room, TV blaring behind him. "Cool, maybe it's aliens." Lisa frowned. "No, Bart, this feels worse. We need to figure out what's happening." Bart smirked. "Sweet, an adventure beats homework." As they stepped outside, the ground quivered faintly, and a distant roar, like a chorus of tormented souls, rolled. Over Springfield, Lisa and Bart exchanged uneasy looks, but pressed forward, determined to uncover the truth. They didn't yet know that the devourer of worlds had turned its gaze upon their town, and the nightmare had only begun. The crimson sky over Springfield lingered into the night, casting an unnatural glow that seeped through every window and stained the town in shades of blood. The air grew thick, heavy with a tension no one could name, and the ordinary hum of life, car horns, barking dogs, the clatter of Moe's Tavern felt muted, as if the world held its breath. Inside the Simpson home, the family went about their evening, oblivious to the creeping dread that had begun to take root. Marge stood in the kitchen, chopping carrots for dinner, when a strange thing happened. The knife slipped from her hand. Not by accident, but as if tugged by an unseen force. It clattered to the floor, and as she bent to retrieve it, she froze. The kitchen was a mess. Pots had slid off the counter, a chair lay toppled, and the fridge door hung ajar, its contents spilled across the tiles. "Homer!" she called, her voice trembling. "Did you do this?" Homer lumbered in from the living room, a Duff beer in hand. "Do what, Marge? I've been watching TV all night." "Then who?" Marge stopped as a shadow darted across the wall, a fleeting, shapeless thing that vanished when she turned to look. Her skin prickled. "Did you see that?" Homer squinted. "See what?" "You're acting weirder than usual, Marge. Upstairs." Bart sprawled on his bed, flipping through a Radioactive Man comic, when he caught a flicker in the corner of his eye. He glanced up, expecting Milhouse sneaking in for a prank, but saw only his skateboard leaning against the wall. Then it moved, sliding an inch, then another, as if pulled by invisible hands. "Milhouse, you little creep, I know it's you!" he shouted, leaping up, but the room was empty, and the skateboard rolled to a stop, mocking him with its stillness. Across town, Mo Shislak wiped down the bar counter, grumbling about slow business. The usual drunks, Barney, Lenny, Carl, slouched in their stools, nursing beers. But tonight, Mo felt off. His hands shook, and a low buzz filled his ears, like static from a broken radio. He snapped at Barney. "Quit breathing so loud, you lout!" Barney blinked, confused. "I ain't breathing loud, Mo." The barman's temper flared, and he smashed a glass against the wall, startling everyone. "Then what's that noise?" he roared, though no one else heard a thing. At Burns Manor, the old tycoon shuffled out onto his balcony, drawn by the eerie sky. His skeletal frame trembled as he peered through binoculars. The streets below seemed normal. Kids on bikes, neighbors chatting. But something was wrong. Then he saw it. His reflection in the glass door behind him. His face was the same, but his smile stretched too wide, too sharp, a grotesque parody of itself. He dropped the binoculars, clutching his chest. "Smithers," he croaked. "Get me inside." Meanwhile, Lisa sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by books from the Springfield library. She'd borrowed them after the sky turned strange, her instincts screaming that this was no natural event. One tome, bound in cracked leather and titled Legends of the Unseen, caught her eye. Its pages spoke of the devourer of worlds, a cosmic entity that fed on sanity and flesh, leaving only ruin in its wake. An ancient hunger, she read aloud, sealed beyond the veil until summoned by mortal folly. Her mind raced back to Frink's lab. Could his experiment have done this? She ran downstairs to tell Marge, who was still shaken from the kitchen incident. "Mom, I think something terrible is happening. I found this book." "Not now, Lisa," Marge interrupted, her voice tight. "I need to clean this mess and find Maggie's pacifier." "But it's important," Lisa insisted. "The sky, the weird stuff, it's all connected." Bart sauntered in, smirking. "What's connected? You sound like one of those nut jobs on TV." Lisa glared at him. "This isn't a joke, Bart. Something's invading Springfield." "Yeah, right," he scoffed, but his bravado faltered as he remembered the skateboard. That night, sleep brought no peace. Homer dreamed of donuts chasing him through a void, their sprinkles turning to eyes that stared into his soul. He woke drenched in sweat, the taste of ash in his mouth. Marge jolted awake beside him, her own nightmare fading, faceless figures clawing at her. Family. Down the hall, Maggie wailed, inconsolable, as if sensing a presence the others couldn't see. The next morning, Homer shuffled to the kitchen, grabbing a donut from the box on the counter. He bit into it and gagged. It tasted bitter like rot. "Marge, did you buy these from Apu's discount bin again?" he complained. "They were fresh yesterday," Marge said, frowning. She took a bite and spat it out, her face paling. Lisa entered, book in hand. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk. I think Springfield's in danger," Homer groaned. "Danger? The only danger here is bad donuts." Marge wrung her hands. "Lisa's right, Homer. Something's not normal. The kitchen, the shadows. I'm scared." Barty joined them, rubbing his eyes. "Okay, fine. I saw something weird too. My skateboard moved on its own." The family stood in uneasy silence, the weight of their shared experiences sinking in. Outside, the crimson sky pulsed faintly, and a low hum vibrated through the house, a whisper of the horror yet to come. The crimson sky over Springfield thickened into a suffocating shroud, its unnatural hue bleeding into a pitch-black void streaked with veins of sickly purple. The air buzzed with a low, relentless hum, like the drone of 1,000 unseen insects, and the ground trembled faintly, as if the earth itself recoiled from what was coming. The town's familiar streets, once straight and predictable, began to twist, curling inward like the coils of a serpent. Cars swerved and crashed as asphalt buckled, and telephone poles bent at impossible angles, their wires snapping with electric shrieks. At the Simpson home, the house groaned as its walls shifted. Corners stretched into jagged edges, and the living room window warped into a bulging, glassy eye that seemed to watch the family. Marge clutched Maggie tightly, her voice shaking. "Homer, what's happening to our house?" Homer, sprawled on the couch with a beer, stared at the ceiling as it rippled like water. "I don't know, Marge. Maybe we got termites again." "Termites don't do this," Lisa snapped, slamming her book shut. "It's the Devourer. It's breaking reality." Bart peeked out the window and yelped. "Whoa, check it out. The street's turning into a freaky roller coaster." Outside, Springfield unraveled. The quick E-Mart pulsed with a dark energy, its neon sign flickering into cryptic symbols no one could read. A vortex of shadow swirled above it, sucking in debris, trash cans, bicycles, even a stray cat that yowled as it vanished. Apu stood frozen behind the counter, watching in horror as his store became the epicenter of the chaos. Across town, Moe's tavern descended into madness. Moe, already on edge from the previous night, laughed hysterically as his arms elongated into writhing tendrils studded with blinking eyes. "Look at me, boys," he cackled, his voice warped into a guttural rasp. Barney stumbled back, dropping his beer. "Moe, what the hell?" The bar emptied as patrons fled, but Moe's laughter followed them, echoing through the twisted streets. At Springfield Elementary, Principal Skinner paced his office, muttering about budget cuts when the walls began to breathe. plaster pulsed like flesh, and the floor softened beneath his feet. He grabbed his phone to call Superintendent Chalmers, but the line hissed with static and whispers. "Chalmers, we've got a situation." His words cut off as a shadow loomed behind him. Hours later, students found only a trail of glistening, meaty sludge leading into the vents, Skinner's glasses abandoned in a puddle of gore. Lisa gathered the family in the living room, her face pale but determined. "We have to stop this. The book says the Devourer feeds on chaos. It's already here." Homer scratched his head. "So what? We just tell it to get lost?" "No, Dad," Lisa said. "We need to find where it came from. Frink's lab. That's where it started." Marge nodded, clutching Maggie. "Lisa's right. I don't know what's happening, but we can't just sit here." Bart grinned, grabbing a slingshot. "Sweet! Let's go kick some cosmic butt." Their resolve faltered as the TV flickered on by itself, broadcasting static that resolved into an image. Ned Flanders praying in his yard. Suddenly, a black tendril erupted from the ground, wrapping around him. His screams turned to gurgles as his body twisted, bones snapping, until he was a heap of flesh and faith swallowed by the earth. "Holy crap," Bart whispered, his bravado gone. The family rushed outside, only to find Springfield unrecognizable. The nuclear plant loomed in the distance, its cooling towers bending like wilting flowers, spewing a plume of glowing ash. Neighbors ran screaming as their homes morphed. Doors became gaping maws, windows wept blood. Krusty the Clown staggered. Past, his makeup smeared, laughing until his jaw unhinged, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Lisa pointed toward the Quickie Mart. "That vortex, it's getting bigger. We need to check Frink's lab first." Homer puffed out his chest, a rare spark of courage igniting. "All right, let's do this. I'll protect my family, even if I don't know what's going on." Marge grabbed his arm. "Homer, be careful. Maggie's been crying non-stop. She feels it too." They set off, navigating streets that buckled and split beneath their feet. The sky pulsed, and the hum grew louder, drowning out their voices. At the tavern, Moe's transformed body slithered out, his tentacled mass lunging at passers-by, his laughter a wet, choking sound. The Simpsons dodged him, pressing on toward Frink's lab. But the lab was a ruin, its walls melted into a grotesque heap. The portal now a gaping maw, spewing shadows. Frink stood before it trembling, his glasses cracked. I tried to shut it down," he stammered, "but it's alive. It wants to be here." Lisa's eyes widened. "Then we're too late. It's already changing everything." As they spoke, the vortex at the Quickie Mart roared, a beacon of the Devourer's growing power. Springfield teetered on the edge of oblivion, its reality unraveling thread by thread. The streets of Springfield had become a nightmarish labyrinth, a grotesque parody of the town they once knew. Buildings sagged and twisted, their bricks oozing like melting wax, while the ground pulsed as if alive, splitting open to reveal fissures that glowed with an unearthly light. The Quickie Mart stood at the heart of the madness, its vortex now a towering maelstrom of shadow and energy, howling with a voice that wasn't a voice, more a chorus of anguish from beyond the stars. The Simpsons stood before Frink's ruined lab, staring at the wreckage as the professor wrung his hands in despair. "It's unstoppable," Frink whimpered, his voice cracking. "The dimensional energy extractor, it's feeding the entity." "I can't close the rift," Lisa clutched her book, her mind racing. "There has to be a way. The legends say it can be sealed, but we need to find its anchor, something tying it to our world." Homer, still gripping a warm beer, puffed out his chest. "Don't worry, little girl. Your old man's got this. I'll go to that swirly thing and tell it to buzz off." Marge grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Homer, no. You saw what happened to Ned and Moe. It's too dangerous." "Relax, Marge," Homer said, waving her off. "I've handled worse. Remember that time I fought a bear or ate that week-old chili? He plucked a donut from his pocket, its glaze smudged but intact. Besides, I've got my lucky donut. Nothing can stop me. Bart smirked. Yeah. Oh, Dad, you're a real hero. Don't trip over your own feet. Lisa shook her head. Dad, please, we need a plan. But Homer was already lumbering off toward the quick E-Mart, his confidence fueled by ignorance and bravado. The family watched, helpless, as he waded through the warped streets, dodging tendrils of shadow that lashed out from the cracks. The air grew colder, the hum louder, and Maggie's cries pierced the chaos, her tiny hands clutching Marge's dress. At the quick E-Mart, Apu had vanished, leaving only a smear of blood. Across the counter, the vortex pulsed, its edges fraying reality. Shelves bent into spirals, candy bars melted into twitching, fleshy blobs. Homer stepped inside, donut raised like a shield. All right, you big ugly tornado. Time to take a hike. This is my town, the vortex answered. A wave of darkness surged forward, a living tide of shadow and malice. Homer froze as it enveloped him, his bravado crumbling. Uh-oh, he muttered, just before the blackness swallowed him whole. His body didn't fall, it unraveled, flesh and bone fragmented into a cloud of glistening shards, floating upward like ash caught in a storm. His scream lingered, a fading echo, as the pieces of Homer Simpson dissolved into the void. Back at the lab, Marge gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. Homer! She cried, tears streaming down her face. Maggie wailed louder, sensing the loss. Bart's jaw dropped, his usual snark silenced. Dad! He's gone. Lisa clenched her fists, fighting back tears. We can't let this be for nothing. We have to stop it now. Frink pointed a shaky finger toward the school. The rift, it's tied to something physical. I detected an energy spike there earlier. Maybe an artifact. Lisa's eyes lit up. The anchor. If we destroy it, we might seal the devourer back where it came from. Marge wiped her eyes, her voice firm despite her grief. Then we're going, for Homer. Bart grabbed his slingshot, his face set. Yeah, let's make that thing pay. As they set off, Springfield spiraled further into ruin. Neighbors succumbed to the madness. Mrs. Muntz clawed at her own face, shrieking about eyes in the walls, while Chief Wiggum fired his gun at shadows that laughed back. Ned Flanders' fate replayed in their minds, his twisted remains a warning of what awaited them all. Krusty staggered through the streets, his laughter now a guttural rasp, his body splitting apart as if unzipped, revealing a mass of wriggling, clown-colored worms. The school loomed ahead, its brick facade pulsing like a heartbeat. The playground was a graveyard of twisted metal, swings dangled like nooses, the slide coiled into a spiral of jagged teeth. Lisa led the way, her book tucked under her arm, while Bart scanned the shadows, slingshot ready. Marge held Maggie close, whispering, reassurances she didn't believe. Inside, the halls were a maze of distortion. Lockers gaped open, spewing papers that fluttered like dying birds, and the fluorescent lights flickered with a sickly green glow. Skinner's absence hung heavy, his office door ajar, the trail of flesh still wet and quivering. We need the basement, Lisa said, her voice steady despite the horror. That's where the energy's strongest. They descended, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The air grew thick, the hum now a roar in their ears. Springfield was crumbling, and with Homer gone, the family's resolve was all that stood between the town and total annihilation. The Springfield Elementary School loomed like a festering wound in the fabric of the town, its once familiar halls now a grotesque mockery of themselves. The walls pulsed with a wet organic rhythm, veins of black ichor threading through the plaster. Lockers hung open, their metal doors twisted into gaping maws that whispered incoherently, while the ceiling sagged, dripping a viscous fluid that burned where it touched the floor. Lisa led the way, her flashlight cutting through the gloom, with Bart at her side, slingshot trembling in his hands. Marge followed, clutching Maggie, whose cries had softened into a pitiful whimper, as if she'd exhausted her fear. "We need to get to the basement," Lisa said, her voice steady but strained. "Frink said the energy spike came from there. It's our only shot." Bart swallowed hard, glancing at the shadows that writhed along the walls. "Yeah, well, let's make it quick. This place gives me the creeps." The descent was treacherous. The stairs twisted beneath their feet, each step bending like rubber before snapping back into place. Portraits of past principals stared down, their painted eyes following the family, mouths stretching into silent screams. At the bottom, the basement door hung ajar, its frame warped into a jagged archway. Beyond it lay a cavernous chamber, far larger than the school's foundation should allow, a space carved from the Devourer's will. In the center stood the relic, a jagged obsidian shard pulsing with a profane light, its surface etched with runes that shifted and crawled like living things. Shadows coiled around it, thick and serpentine, their forms studded with countless blinking eyes. The air thrummed with a low, guttural chant, and the family felt it in their bones, a call to surrender, to dissolve into the void. "That's it," Lisa breathed, clutching her book. "The anchor. We destroy it, and maybe we stop this." Bart edged closer, peering at the relic. "Looks like something out of one of my comics. How do we break it?" Lisa flipped through her pages, her hands shaking. "The book mentions a sealing ritual, words to banish it, but we need to get past those shadows first." Before they could plan, Bart acted. "I got this!" he shouted, lunging forward with a yell. He swung his slingshot, firing a rock at the relic, but a shadow lashed out faster than thought. It wrapped around him, lifting him off the ground. His scream was cut short as his body erupted, flesh and bone exploding outward in a spray of red and white, splattering the walls. What remained of Bart Simpson rained down in chunks, his slingshot clattering uselessly to the floor. "Bart!" Lisa shrieked, falling to her knees. Marge turned away, shielding Maggie, her sobs muffled against her daughter's head. The shadows pulsed, feeding on the violence, and the relic's light flared brighter. Lisa wiped her eyes, forcing herself to stand. "I can't lose anyone else," she whispered, flipping to the ritual page. "I have to do this." Back at the Simpson home, the house had turned predator. Marge had left the door unlocked in their haste, and now it slammed shut behind an unseen force. The walls shuddered, closing in like a vice, their wood splintering into jagged teeth. Furniture twisted into grotesque shapes, chairs sprouted limbs, the couch opened a moor-lined with upholstery spikes. Marge, still reeling from Bart's death, stumbled inside with Maggie, seeking refuge that no longer existed. "Marge, get out!" Lisa's voice echoed in her mind, a memory of warning, but it was too late. The ceiling buckled, raining plaster and claws, and the floor surged upward, swallowing Marge's legs. She screamed, clutching Maggie as the house consumed them. Wood and flesh fused in a sickening crunch, their bodies crushed into a single quivering mass. The last sound was Maggie's faint cry, snuffed out by the darkness. Lisa, alone in the basement, didn't hear their end. She faced the relic, her flashlight flickering as the shadows closed in. "I can do this," she muttered, beginning the chant from the book. "By the light of forgotten stars, I bind thee." Her voice wavered as visions assaulted her. Worlds reduced to ash, oceans of wriggling limbs, faces of her family dissolving into nothingness. The Devourer's presence pressed against her mind, a weight that threatened to shatter her sanity. Shadows lunged, but she pressed on, shouting the words through gritted teeth. "Return to the void from whence you came." The relic trembled, its light faltering, but the cost was steep. Her strength waned, her vision blurred, and the basement spun around her. She was so close, yet so far from saving anyone. Outside, Springfield burned. The nuclear plant melted into a glowing slag, its radiation feeding the vortex. Townsfolk fell one by one. Chief Wiggum's body bloated and burst sideshow. Bob's laughter turned to a gurgling wail as his flesh peeled away. The devourer's hunger grew, and Lisa's fight was all that stood between it and the world. The basement of Springfield Elementary had become a cathedral of despair. Its walls, a throbbing mass of flesh and stone, slick with the blood of Bart's shattered remains. The air was a suffocating miasma, thick with the stench of decay and the relentless hum of the devourer's presence. Lisa stood alone before the relic, its obsidian surface pulsing with a light that seared her eyes, the runes writhing like worms. Beneath its skin, her flashlight lay broken at her feet, its beam snuffed out by the encroaching shadows. The book trembled in her hands, its pages curling as if alive as she chanted the final words of the sealing ritual. "By the chains of eternity I cast thee out," she shouted, her voice raw and cracking. The relic shuddered, its glow flickering, and for a fleeting moment hope flared in her chest. But the shadows responded with fury. They surged forward, no longer mere tendrils, but a tidal wave of darkness, their countless eyes blazing with malice. Invisible claws seized her, lifting her off the ground, and the book slipped from her grasp, pages scattering like dead leaves. Lisa fought, kicking against the void, but the devourer's will was a force beyond comprehension. Her mind buckled as visions flooded in, planets crumbling into dust, skies torn open by gaping maws, her family's faces melting into screams. Homer's fragmented body floated before her, his donut still clutched in a severed hand. Bart's exploded remains, reformed only to burst again. Marge and Maggie fused into a grotesque eyeless thing, their mouths stretched in silent agony. The images clawed at her sanity, each one a dagger to her soul. "No!" she screamed, clawing at the air. "I won't let you win!" But her strength was gone, drained by grief and exhaustion. The shadows tightened, their grip a cold, crushing embrace, and she felt her life slipping away. Her skin prickled as if dissolving, her bones ached with an unnatural weight, and her vision darkened. The last words of the ritual died on her lips. As her body went limp, her eyes wide and unseeing, frozen in a mask of terror. Lisa Simpson, the last spark of resistance, was extinguished, her form collapsing into a heap beside the relic. Above, Springfield was a graveyard of twisted ruin. The school collapsed inward, its structure folding like wet paper, burying the basement in rubble. The Quickie-Mart vortex roared triumphantly, now a towering pillar of shadow that pierced the sky, its edges fraying the fabric of reality. The giant nuclear plant's meltdown spread, a glowing tide of molten metal and flesh that consumed streets and homes. The few survivors met grisly ends, Milhouse's body bloated until it popped, spraying a fountain of gore. Groundskeeper Willie's skin peeled away, revealing a writhing mass of roots that dragged him underground. The townsfolk who'd fled found no refuge. Cars stalled on highways that looped impossibly back to Springfield, their drivers devoured by shadows that seeped from the asphalt. News helicopters circled, broadcasting the chaos, but their signals warped into static laced with guttural chants. Beyond the town's borders, scientists and military scrambled to respond, their instruments failing as the anomaly grew. Springfield was no longer a place. It was a wound, a gateway to the devourer's hunger. The streets became a living nightmare, buildings fused into grotesque hybrids, taverns with pulsing veins, houses with windows that blinked and wept. The ground split open, birthing abominations, tentacled masses that wore the faces of the dead, moaning in voices that weren't their own. Moe's transformed body slithered through the wreckage, a tangle of limbs and eyes, his laughter a wet, endless dirge, Krusty's worm-riddled corpse danced in the ruins, a macabre puppet of the void. The Devourer's power swelled, its presence a palpable weight that crushed the last vestiges of hope. The sky churned, a vortex of purple and black that swallowed the stars, and the hum became a deafening roar, a hymn to annihilation. Springfield's remnants, its people, its buildings, its very essence, melded into a grotesque tapestry of flesh, bone, and stone. The screams of the fallen echoed eternally, trapped in a dimension of torment, a monument to the entity's triumph. Beyond the town, the world trembled. Cities reported strange skies, shadows moving against the wind, whispers in the night. The Devourer, sated but insatiable, stretched its tendrils outward, its hunger no longer confined to Springfield. Lisa's death had sealed not its banishment, but its victory, and the earth lay open to its feast. In the silence of the basement, beneath the rubble, the relic pulsed once more. A heartbeat in the dark. The book lay nearby, its final page torn and stained with blood, the ritual incomplete. Springfield was gone, and with it, the last chance to stop the end. Springfield was no more. Where a quirky town once stood, there now sprawled a festering abyss, a writhing expanse of flesh, stone, and shadow that pulsed with a life not of this world. The air shimmered with a sickly heat, and the ground quaked, splitting open to reveal chasms where eyeless things slithered, their moans a chorus of eternal suffering. The Quickie-Mart vortex had grown into a colossal maw, its edges fraying the sky, spewing tendrils that clawed at the horizon. The Devourer of Worlds had claimed its prize, and its hunger stretched beyond the ruins. In the buried basement of Springfield Elementary, the relic lay silent, its obsidian surface dulled but still warm, a heartbeat in the dark. Beside it, Lisa's crumpled body rested, her lifeless eyes staring at the scattered pages of her book. A torn fragment fluttered in an unseen breeze, its ink smeared with blood. The true horror is not the death, but the loss of sanity. Her final realization, whispered in her mind as the shadows took her, now lingered as a prophecy fulfilled. A memory flickered through the void, days before the end, when the Simpsons returned from a trip to a dusty antique shop in Shelbyville. Homer had spotted the relic on a shelf, a jagged black stone labeled Mysterious Artifact, $5. "Look, Marge, a cool souvenir," he'd said, grinning as he tossed it into their car. Marge had frowned, uneasy, but let it slide. They'd brought it home, a forgotten trinket stashed in the basement, until Frink's experiment awoke its dormant power. Lisa, in her last moments, had pieced it together. Their own carelessness had summoned the Devourer. If only she'd known sooner. Above, the remnants of Springfield twisted into a grotesque tableau. The Simpson house stood as a monument of ruin, its walls fused with Marge and Maggie's crushed forms, their faces stretched across the wood in silent screams. Homer's fragmented remains floated in the vortex, a cloud of ash and bone orbiting the darkness. Bart's splattered flesh coated the school's rubble, his slingshot embedded in a wall that pulsed like a heart. Other faces emerged. Ned Flanders, twisted corpse, sprouted from the earth. Moe's tentacled mass slithered endlessly. Krusty's worm-riddled body danced in a loop of decay. Each death was a thread in the Devourer's tapestry, a gallery of torment preserved forever. The world beyond Springfield felt the ripple. In Capital City, the sky darkened, streaked with purple veins that pulsed like arteries. Shadows moved against the wind, slipping into homes and minds. A news anchor's broadcast cut off mid-sentence, his face splitting into a grin too wide, too sharp, before the screen went black. Planes fell from the sky, their pilots clawing at their own eyes as visions overwhelmed them. Oceans churned, birthing leviathans of flesh and teeth that devoured ships whole. The Devourer's reach grew, a cancer spreading across the earth. In a distant lab, scientists pored over satellite images of Springfield's fall, their screens glitching with static and runes. "It's expanding," one whispered, his voice trembling. "We can't stop it." Military bases launched missiles, but they dissolved mid-flight, raining as ash. Prayer. Vigils formed, only to collapse into madness as worshippers turned on each other, their faith consumed by the void. The planet buckled under the weight of an entity older than time, its hunger a force no weapon or will could defy. The Devourer itself emerged, no longer a mere presence, but a titan of shadow and malice. Its form defied sight. Towering spires of wriggling limbs, eyes that burned like dying stars, mouths that sang in tongues of despair. It rose from Springfield's corpse, its tendrils piercing the atmosphere, coiling around the moon and dimming its light. Planets beyond Earth flickered out, their death silent but absolute as the entity fed on the cosmos itself. In the ruins, a final vision lingered. The Simpsons, frozen in their last moments. Homer's bravado shattered by the vortex. Bart's defiance undone by the shadows. Marge and Maggie crushed by their own home. Lisa's intellect broken by the infinite. Their faces, distorted and merged with the landscape, stared out as if pleading for a mercy that would never come. Springfield had been the spark, and now the universe paid the price. The narrative closed with Lisa's words, etched into the void. The true horror is not the death, but the loss of sanity. The Devourer cared not for her wisdom. It devoured, all leaving only silence and ruin. Earth fell, a speck in its endless feast, and the stars winked out one by one until nothing remained but the dark.